have the normal 40-minute discussion, 40-minute presentation, and then afterwards discussion.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you all for coming. I've been instructed to stay in this position so that I can be captured by the camera. So I'll try my best to do that. But I am a performer, so I might go off stage a bit. Okay, so what I want to do today is I want to start by transporting you directly to a very different setting than this nice room in Stellenbosch. I'm going to take you to a surrogacy hostel in a little town in Western India, where women are involved in arguably one of the most controversial labor market, that of producing humans. I'll start by reading two short excerpts from my book, Wombs in Labor, to take you into my field. During the writing of the book, that was how the field was. The third excerpt I'll read is an updated one from my last visit to the field, April 2017, to give you an idea as to how the current situation is. Okay, so let's start with field note 1. 2006, Hope Maternity Clinic, India. The room is lined with 8 beds, one next to the other, with barely enough space to walk in between. A ceiling fan groans above. Some of the beds are raised on one side with a block so that the women can have their legs elevated after the embryo transfer or any gynecological checkups. There's nothing else in the room. Each bed has a pregnant woman resting on it. This is their home for the next few months. Their husbands can visit but not stay the night. It's a reminder that they cannot have sex, not for the next few months. The women are still in their night clothes and it's nearly evening. The day has been planned for them. The morning visit from the doctor, 8 a.m. breakfast, 9 a.m. medicine, 10 a.m. rest hour, 12 p.m. injections, followed by an afternoon nap. The evening is nothing different, except perhaps the broker will bring in a new member. A bed will be added to the room. Another pregnant woman will join the ranks. Field Notes 2007, Hope Maternity Clinic, India again. It feels strange to be back. Last year when I went to say goodbye, the doctor asked me rather bluntly, "You're not coming back, right?" And I said no, and meant it. But here I am back in the clinic. The doctor is surprisingly welcoming and waves out a hi through her pink sleeveless t-shirt. Last year she was always wrapped in a traditional Indian sari, and this new avatar is intriguing. I wonder if it has anything to do with her starring in Oprah Winfrey's segment on infertility. On the doctor's instruction, a nurse leads me to the new wing of the clinic, a brand new surrogacy hostel. It's their rest hour, but the surrogates agree to talk to me if I sneak in some snacks for them. I run down and get some dhokla chaat, which is baked dough with raisins, and we gather around the first bed to devour the food. I feel disturbed that the surrogates are still given such little space and absolutely no privacy in their new hostel. But as I watch their camaraderie, I wonder, are they perhaps better off lying next to each other, chatting and laughing their bizarre pregnancy away? Field Note 3, the updated field note, it's from New Hope Fertility Clinic, and this is from this year, 2017, April. I'm at Dr. Durga's brand new fertility clinic, a 3-storied glass and steel building in the middle of sugarcane fields. The reception area is straight out of a science fiction novel, clean, high-tech, a bit too clean, a bit too high-tech for its surroundings, almost artificial in its efficiency. There are no people except the staff of the clinic, very unlike the bustling, chaotic, and slightly grubby clinics I have worked in the past 10 years. The basement is the domain of the surrogates, their home for the 9 months. There are 12 rooms with 12 beds in each. Almost all are occupied by women in various stages of their pregnancy. Some are sitting, but most are lying down watching a cartoon play on loop on the television. There's a feel of everything working in slow motion, a complete contrast to the high-tech efficiency upstairs. Unlike in my last visits, where women in the surrogacy hostels spoke constantly with loud laughter, giggles, and high fives of camaraderie amidst all the pain and hopes of changing their lives through this work, the underlying mood today is of boredom. Aarti seems to speak for them all when she says, "I don't even know whether I will be paid anymore. The government has told the doctor that this surrogacy is wrong. I don't know if it's right or wrong for them. I thought it was right for me. But this waiting I cannot bear. I just want to break these bars on the window and fly away. Fly away to my family, to my life, to a life. So commercial surrogacy or paid pregnancy is a multi-billion-dollar industry in India alone. India is not the only one to offer commercial surrogacy. California is still the world leader. But before I launch into this, does it make sense, the word surrogacy, gestational surrogacy? So essentially, if a couple from Cape Town wants to, for whatever reason, cannot conceive naturally, they cannot afford or they cannot find a surrogate in South Africa, they might want to fly down to India and hire a surrogate. What does that mean? Most probably it'll be the sperm of the man, the intended father, which will be fused with the egg of the intended mother, or they could think of using an egg donor. Then these two would be fused to make an embryo, and the embryo will be implanted into the womb of a waiting Indian surrogate mother. So the surrogate mother in India has absolutely no genetic connections to the baby. She's merely birthing it. She's merely the oven in which the bun is being baked. And that's why the kind of inappropriate name surrogate or substitute mother. And although this might not be dinner table conversation for all of us here, actually the conversations around surrogacy is not restricted to medical circles and has been generating feminist, ethical, legal, and social debates for over 3 decades now. This scholarship I would loosely classify into 4 frames: liberal feminist defense of the practice that emphasizes a woman's right to do what she wants with her body, works that debate on the ethics or morality of the practice, feminist and other literature that focuses on the multiple systems of inequality and exploitation that are potentially reinforced by such practices, and finally the ethnographic turn, or the more recent ethnographic work which tap into the lived experiences of surrogacy. And this ethnographic turn has in some sense diluted the moral certainty about the need to reject surrogacy practices, but still the overwhelming response to surrogacy is one of intense anxiety. And this anxiety, of course, increases multifold when it involves women in the global south, or the third world, or the developing world, whatever you want to call it. And one of the world leaders for surrogacy is, of course, India. Until recently, the entire focus about I just said to you that the debate has been going on for 3 decades now, but the entire debating was by and about women in Europe and North America, which is not surprising since commercial surrogacy is a very recent phenomenon outside of the Euro-American context. But the complete absence of any empirical data had not prevented scholars from making alarming predictions as to what would happen when these technologies cross borders and move to the global south. For instance, feminist Andrea Dworkin predicted in 1978, while sexual prostitutes sell vagina, rectum, and mouth, reproductive prostitutes would sell other body parts, wombs, ovaries, and eggs. And so sociologist Barbara Rothman in 1988 asked, can we look forward to baby farms with white embryos grown in young and third world women? But over the past 10 years that I have studied this industry, I have come to realize that my textbook and Eurocentric understanding of commercial surrogacy was going to be entirely inadequate and inappropriate for this new and unusual setting of surrogacy in India. It would be a complete mistake to think of surrogacy as simply a synergy of needs of 2 classes of women. One group, the affluent in India or abroad, needing a healthy womb, and the other needing money. This kind of formulation ignores the dynamics of surrogacy outside the sphere of reproduction. Surrogates in India are navigating much more than their identity as mothers. They are grappling with their new identity as participants in a fledgling market in India that is morally contentious and constructed as deviant and unnatural. And while yes, it is true that many of these women are coerced into surrogacy by their family, often their mother-in-laws, many others are negotiating with their families to gain control over their own bodies and their fertility in order to take part in this process. As surrogates, they suddenly find themselves in a very unfamiliar, and pay attention to this, a very unfamiliar relationship with a hyper-medicalized system of reproduction, a medical system that was previously completely inaccessible to them as lower class women in an antenatal state. And I'll come to that in a minute. Finally, as women hired by clients from within and across borders, these women are straddling complex relationships that often cross borders of race, class, and nationality. So a linear emphasis on just the reproduction or the mothering component of commercial surrogacy completely will ignore these intricacies. Instead of burying surrogacy within the Eurocentric debates of motherhood and reproduction, what I have done in all my previous works is to analyze commercial surrogacy as a form of labor that challenges the socially constructed dichotomy between production and reproduction, and argued that commercial surrogacy in India is a new kind of reproductive labor emerging with globalization. But what I want to do today for you is to dig in a bit deeper and complicate the story by arguing that there is a fundamental paradox of this new market, wherein a market that literally, can you read that? A market that literally produces humans and human relationships is critically dependent on the maintenance of a global racial reproductive hierarchy that privileges certain relationships while completely denying others. But before I get to my data, let me give you a quick sketch of my field and methods. Okay, so surrogacy is estimated to be $2 billion. So that's a lot of zeros. $2 billion market in India alone, and India has about 3,000 clinics which offer surrogacy services, but 30,000 which have the potential, so the technology to offer surrogacy services. The Indian case has got immense media attention because the market up till last year was flourishing without any formal regulations. In fact, initially fertility clinics got a lot of state support because they were contributing to reproductive tourism for the country. And the primary marketing tool that these clinics, often with the help of global brokerages, used was package deals. So one of my favorite quotes is from one of these global online brokerage companies: "See Taj Mahal by the moonlight while your embryo grows in a petri dish." And all that, of course, they're getting for a third of the cost in California. So there are several interrelated reasons why India has become what is called the mother destination of commercial surrogacy. Mexico, Thailand, Cambodia, Nepal are the other ones coming up. No, Kenya and Cambodia are the ones which are coming up. It's been recently banned in Mexico and Thailand. But what makes India so attractive is not just the sheer economics of it, but also the immense structural inequality between the clients and the surrogates, which can be extremely convenient for the clients during and after the contract period. There's not too many places in the world where surrogates can be kept under constant surveillance during the 9 months of their pregnancy without creating a lot of human rights ruckus. Is a working class Indian woman with no education, with little understanding of the medical and legal procedures around surrogacy, likely to fight for custody over the baby that she gave birth to for a client from California? No. And this is what makes India such an attractive destination. When I started my fieldwork 10 years ago, this industry was booming in pretty much a legal vacuum with minimum state interference and very few laws regulating the contract. As a consequence, the international parents were extremely happy and could actually get services which are banned in most parts of the world. But this started changing in 2013 when the government decided that they want to restrict the option of surrogacy to only married clients. So in 2013, they decided that the gay surrogacy market is huge and it generates billions of dollars because the only way gay men can have a genetic baby is by using a gestational surrogate. But the Indian government decided to ban gay surrogacy, and that's when the banning started. And in 2016, it decided to ban surrogacy for all international clients, irrespective of their sexuality. But I want to keep the discussion about the legal changes or the legal chaos for later. Let me stick to what was the field like while I was writing this book, and I can talk much more in the Q&A. The biggest attraction for clients is the hostel, where women can be under the surveillance of hostel matrons and doctors. And that is precisely why this small clinic in Western India has become the place where Oprah Winfrey did her show, where all cosmopolitan, everybody is writing stories about this little clinic in Western India, not in Mumbai, not in Delhi, but in a tiny town in Western India, precisely because she came up with this, the doctor came up with this plan of putting the surrogates in hostel. And by 2015, this clinic had already given birth to 1,000 babies, and that doesn't include the twins that it gave birth to. Method, I conducted open-ended interviews with over 112 women. I also interviewed their families, clients, intended parents, clients are called intended parents, doctors, hostel matrons, surrogacy brokers. I conducted participant observation for over 9 months at the hostel. And can you all see? I feel like my big hair is blocking the view. Can you see? Okay. And I pretty much ended up living with the surrogates in the hostel. The doctor did not like me, but the surrogates, in some sense, adopted me. At that time, I was unmarried. I didn't have any children. So in their view, I was their junior. So they adopted me as their little sister. So I lived in the hostel. I prayed with them during their prayer hours. I cooked lunches for them. I attended their compulsory English and computer classes, then the beauty training classes that they used to have in the evening. I revisited the hostel again in 2015 and 2016, and then again in 2017, and visited some former surrogates and organized some participatory livelihood generating workshops with them. And the multimedia docudrama that Stephen, you were talking about, Made in India, is based on these participatory livelihood generating workshops plus my research. And I won't have time to talk much about it, but it's been touring all over the world. And what I've learned from playing this aspect of my research instead of just talking like in lecture halls is that theater is a very effective way of not just disseminating information but also doing social research, because it's an interactive play. And the way it happens is I present, in a slightly fictional way, I present my ethnography to the audience through a documentary plus me playing out different characters. But in the second half of the docudrama, you, the audience, can ask me questions and I answer them in character. So you could ask me to play the doctor, you could ask me to play a surrogate that you have met in the documentary, or you could ask questions to me, the researcher who's been researching this field for the past 10 years. And I try to stay true to the character by answering in character. And the kind of information, the kind of dialogues it has generated, I don't think it can generate in a lecture hall. But that being said, I am in a lecture hall, so let's get on. All married women with children, ages between 20 to 45. Some of them are housewives, but not the majority. Others worked in informal work as nannies, maids, selling bangles on the street, in farms. Average education, beginning of middle school. Median family income, and that's important. They reported a median family income of about 600 rand per month. And if you compare that to the poverty line in India, more than half of them were below the poverty line. So undoubtedly, most of them were doing this out of sheer financial desperation. 50% of them were hired by Indians in India. The other 50% were hired either by non-resident Indians, so Indians in the diaspora, or just people from across the world. Again, I can talk more about the field, the demography in the Q&A if there are questions about caste and such, but let me move on to the ethnographic findings. So the fundamental difference between state policies regarding birth control and reproduction in Euro-America and in India is that unlike in the Euro-American context, where most women, at least most white women, historically had to struggle to get access to the most basic birth control methods, in India the state forced it on them. The Indian state became the first in the world to initiate an official population control program in 1952, and while unlike China, because of its democratic status, it had to have somewhat of a liberal front. In reality, it has continued to promote only methods like sterilization and long-term hormonal implants that diminish lower-class women's power to choose. And this is pretty much the case in South Africa as well. But the Indian population control program cannot be discussed just as a nationalist agenda and cannot be understood without reference to the post-World War international population movement dominated by governments and public and private organizations like USAID, UNFPA, World Bank, which promoted and funded fertility control programs in the global south. In general, this hegemonic antinatalist propaganda portrays the fertile bodies of lower class and black women in the global south as recklessly reproductive and to be blamed for their own poverty. The narratives of the surrogates reveal the state propaganda. 38-year-old Varsha is a mother of 3 children and is a surrogate for a couple from North India. She recalls the many visits by the Didi. She calls her the Didi, but she's actually referring to the family planning nurse who comes from the big cities and goes from village to village telling these women not to have too many babies. So Varsha says, I never used any contraceptives, just regulated intercourse according to my monthly cycle, but the Didi would stop at her huts in her visits and tell me to think about getting sterilization. But why do you not get it, she would say. She showed me pictures of women with one daughter, where the daughter and mother would be smiling. She sometimes scolded me and said, that is why your condition is like this. The more babies you have, the poorer you get. Do you not understand that? Perhaps she's right. If I had not had my last child, the first 2 would have been happier. Varsha pauses. But now the tables have turned. You see, it's my 4th pregnancy, this surrogate birth, that will make my entire family happy. So at some levels, commercial surrogacy drives women like Varsha to think of their bodies as a possible source of value, a value historically denied by the state itself. The money earned through surrogacy often becomes a source of great pride and an indicator of their productivity. Dipali is a 24-year-old surrogate for a couple from Cape Town, South Africa, and she's a divorcee with 3 children who lives with her brother. She wants to use the money to buy herself a plot of land so that she can become self-sufficient. And she says, when I came here the first time, I told Dr. Madam that I'm ready for all kinds of treatments, injections, medicines. I suffered the pain and bleeding. I almost got paralysis twice because of the side effects of the medicines. But I'm not complaining about the pain. I worried, I cried, and I complained when my husband used to beat me up in front of the children. That pain is something you do not want. This kind of pain to the body I'm willing to take. It will not be wasted. It will give me enough money to make me self-sufficient. So in the women's narratives, having control over their reproductive lives and bodies is about being able to use their body for work and using the money productively. Simultaneously, it's also about negotiating reproductive decisions with their husbands in order to get involved in surrogacy. Vidya is a 30-year-old surrogate for a couple from Toronto, Canada. She has repeatedly been told about sterilization by family planning nurses, much like Parvati was, but she has been postponing the operation, she says, because I have 2 daughters and 1 son. My husband wanted 1 more son, so we decided not to get sterilization done. It must have been God's wish that I do this. By that she means become a surrogate. If I had got the operation done, I would have missed this chance to earn money for my children. But now that I'm successfully pregnant, I don't think I will try for another son anymore. I know my husband wants a son very badly, but I'm going to try and convince him. If I have a baby of my own, I will lose the chance to become a surrogate again. I want to conserve my body and save my next pregnancy for surrogacy. Dr. Madam does not want surrogates who have more than 3 babies of their own. So you can see what's happening here. Vidya has postponed sterilization and not listened to the Didi's advice because her husband wants another son. Now, in order to become a surrogate, she's willing to forego having that son. Surrogates like Dipali and Vidya are ostensibly taking control over their bodies by engaging in surrogacy. But while at one level, these women might seem to fulfill feminist ideals, their life stories are not merely heroic tales of subversion. The decisions they make about their own reproduction ironically conform to the hegemonic agenda of reducing the fertility of lower class women. Vidya is not the only one to forego having her own child in order for her to have a child for someone else to raise. Surrogate Parvati is 36 and one of the oldest surrogates in the clinic. And she says, when I came here the first time, the doctor said I was too old to have a baby, too old to donate eggs, but I could try for surrogacy. I underwent treatment, injections, vagina check. During one of these early checkups, they realized that I was pregnant with my own child. We had just one child and we have always wanted one more. But at that stage, we needed the money more than a baby, so I convinced my husband and got my own baby aborted. Parvati's life decisions starkly highlight what feminist anthropologist Shelley Cullen calls stratified reproduction. Power relations by which some categories of people are empowered to nurture and reproduce while others are disempowered. Surrogacy in India is undoubtedly one of the clearest manifestations of stratified reproduction. But this label, stratified reproduction, seems a bit too benign. It did not happen by chance or accident, but is a consequence of conscious national and global priorities that value the reproduction of only a certain race and class of women. On the one hand, government expenditure on public health infrastructure is shrinking and poor women are being subjected to population control targets. And this is all across the global south. On the other hand, Indian scientists are investing in new reproductive technologies, new genetic technologies, new this and that and the other, and medical tourism and reproductive tourism is booming, which is yet another paradox of the post-liberalization era and an explicit instance of what I have called neo-eugenics in my book. The new subtle form of eugenics whereby the neoliberal notion of consumer choice justifies promotion of assisted reproductive services for the rich, and at the same time, by portraying poor people, poor black people, often in the global south, as strains on the world's economy and environment, justifies aggressive antenatal policies. On this rather depressing note, I want to move to the next paradox. The surrogate's construction of kinship ties with the baby and the other mother, the intended mother, and what it does to the construction of them as disposable. So the fundamental reason why surrogacy creates such intense anxieties is that it allows for the extension of the market into the so-called private sphere of reproduction and sexuality. It defies laws of nature, family, religion, and is perceived to be commercialization of motherhood, the act of giving birth and children. As producers of such intensely controversial and in India stigmatized services, the surrogates have a variety of negotiating strategies to counter not just the contractual nature of their service, but also the transient nature of their motherhood. Right from recruitment to delivery, the surrogates' transience and disposability as mothers is highlighted constantly in the hospital and by the doctors. The surrogates are told that they are just a vessel, they have no genetic connection with the baby will be taken away from them. They are not even allowed to breastfeed the baby so that they don't have any, so that they can't build up a relationship with the baby once it's born. But these discourses of disposability do not go unchallenged. The surrogates resist these by forging kinship ties with the baby. Now, in classic kinship studies, kin relations were frequently grounded in the domain of nature and genes, very often with a patrilineal focus. For instance, this patrilineal focus can be seen in the notion of the seed versus the earth, where the seed symbolizes the father's contribution and the field represents the role of the mother. Women are expected to behave like earth, as mere receptacles of the male seed, and give back the fruit, preferably male children in case of India. Simultaneously, in popular understanding in Ayurveda, which is the indigenous system of medicine in India, semen is understood as derived from blood. So being the product of the father's seed, a child inherits the father's blood and is therefore placed in his group. The mother's blood thus becomes significant in nourishing the fetus, but not anything beyond that. The surrogates I spoke to had a very different interpretation of the blood tie. They not only claim that the fetus is nourished by its gestational mother, that is them, but also that this blood or substantial tie imparts identity to the child or the fetus. Women within the surrogacy process thus become much more than mere receptacles of the male seed. Surrogate Parvati is 36 and I've already spoken about her. I meet Parvati right after a fetal reduction surgery, which is very common in the clinic because there are multiple births and the women are not strong enough to carry multiple births. So one of the fetuses regularly is eliminated through a surgery. She tells me, Parvati says that she was against this surgery. And she says, Dr. Madam told us that the babies wouldn't get enough space to move around and grow, so we should get the surgery. But both Nandini Didi, that's the genetic mother, and I wanted to keep all 3 babies. I told Dr. Madam that I'll keep 1 and Didi can keep 2. After all, it's my blood, even if it's their genes. And who knows whether at my age I'll be able to have more babies. So Parvati is very creatively interpreting blood tie to make claims on the baby. Of course, she will not be allowed to keep the 3rd baby, but that's what she feels she can because she feels that she has a blood tie with the baby. Surrogate Ravina makes a very similar claim, but pay attention to what she says apart from the blood tie. She says, Anna, the genetic, so I run into Ravina right after her 2nd ultrasound, which was to determine the sex of the baby. And she says, Anna, the genetic mother, wanted a girl, but I told her even before the ultrasound, coming from me, this will be a boy. My first 2 children were boys, this one will be 2, and see, I was right, it is a boy. After all, they just gave the eggs, but the blood, all the sweat, all the effort is mine. Of course, it's going after me. So she is using not just the blood tie, but the substantial tie of sweat, of labor to establish ties with the baby. So the kinship ties that the surrogates forge with the baby resist the hegemonic discourses that portray surrogates as disposable and substitute mother. The other kind of kinship tie that I want to talk about is the ties that they form with the intended mother. Divya is a former surrogate, and she constantly talks about Anna, the woman from Canada, from the United States, as her sister, and she believes that they have a relationship which is based on mutual reciprocity. She says, Anna came in the 8th month for 2 months and she stayed with me. We lived together like a family. My husband got her passport fixed from the American consulate, so you can see what kind of informalities are happening. We have been in constant touch even after they left. She brought me these earrings this time, she says, and she shows me her diamond and white gold earrings. Diksha also believes, Diksha, another surrogate, believes that her relationship with her client from Japan is based on mutual respect and reciprocity. And she says, sorry, this is the wrong one. I'll just read it out to you. She says, Jessie, that's the Japanese mother, came to visit me during the baby shower. The hostel matron routinely organizes a baby shower for the surrogates. And Jessie showered me with gifts and gifted rupees 1500 for my children, which is about 120 rands. It's been 3 years, and today she, the baby born out of surrogacy, would have been 3 years old. I wished Jessie in the morning on computer via Skype. And this is a computer that Jessie has brought for me, she says. Now I can email them using this, and they send me pictures by email. But these stories of Jessie and Divya and Ravina, where the relationships are sustained across contract period, are really rare. And a matter of fact, these are the only 2 women who are able to live their dream of sustaining the relationship beyond the contract period. Almost all clients are very apprehensive that the surrogate might decide that she wants some relationship with their child. So they want to sever all ties right after the contract period. Very often when the woman is still recovering from her cesarean section, they take the baby away. I meet Tejal in 2011 and she recalls the delivery day very bitterly. She says, there was a lot of problem with the delivery and I had to have 15 to 20 bottles of IV in 2 days. Ultimately, I got a cesarean section. Oh.
Okay, you can carry on. I'll try and figure it out.
Just try the cable on the back of the computer because before it was a bit loose.
It's not that critical. I'll leave it out. Ultimately, I got a cesarean section. I was unconscious when the couple came and took the baby away. They didn't even show the baby to my husband. The baby would have been 3 years today, but I don't even know what he looks like. I used to think they would invite us to America. I used to think of her as a sister. All of it went to waste. Forget an invitation, they did not even call me to see if I'm dead or alive. They just finished their business, picked up the baby, and left. Surrogate Munni has a similar tale. Munni delivered twins for couples settled in the United States. And she, like Tejal, is very bewildered by the change in her client's behavior. She says, my party was from America, but they used to come here. Party, by party she means clients. But they used to come here and visit me often. They would call me every day from America and come visit me every 2 months. They even allowed me to breastfeed one of the babies. They always said that when the baby grows up, they would tell her about me, about her second mother in India. It's been over a year now. She would have been 1 year old last week. There have been no phone calls, nothing. I don't know what has gone wrong. Munni seems surprised by the sudden severing of ties. Her relationship with her client was unusually friendly while she was carrying the baby. But once she completed her contract, her reproduction became a classic example of alienated labor. Her clients honored the contract, paid her, and appropriated the surplus, the baby. So what do we make of this market for producing humans? One option is, of course, to follow the path that many countries have, which is to have a formal ban. That's an option, but not a very effective one. Bans across the world have not stopped people from demanding genetic babies. And with globalization, clients continue to cross borders to make use of these technologies, and they will cross borders to the countries where it's cheaper. I believe that banning surrogacy in India will do two things. Either it will push the whole industry underground, like it has done in China. And what would that do? It would reduce the very little rights that these women have right now. Imposing a blanket ban on surrogacy in India can do another thing. It can shift the whole business to another country in the global south. Again, this is not mere speculation. In 2013, when the government of India banned what's called gay surrogacy, that is, it did not allow any gay clients anymore into India, what did that do? It shifted the entire gay market to Thailand. Then Thailand banned it. It shifted the whole industry to Nepal. Earthquake in Nepal exposed the industry. The whole thing moved to Cambodia. I have just got back from fieldwork in Phnom Penh in Cambodia, and now I believe the government of Cambodia has also banned it, and now it's moving to Laos and Kenya. What do these kind of bans do? It just shifts the morally restrictive, morally sticky issue to another country in the global south. So instead of restrictive laws like bans, in all my talks and all my works, I advocate for a carefully thought out law that regulates the industry and protects the rights of the women workers, the surrogates themselves. But I strongly believe that a complex and global issue like surrogacy just cannot be resolved by national laws. A global issue like surrogacy needs a global dialogue. And in collaboration with the nascent surrogates workers community in India, about a year ago, I proposed to The Hague an international law around international surrogacy, much like international adoption, that is founded on openness and transparency on 3 fronts: in the structure of payments, which is essential, in the medical process, and here there's a lot of conversation required around what is consent, what does consent mean, does it merely mean a signature, or for uneducated women, what can it mean? And in the relationships, and this is very important, transparency in the relationships forged within surrogacy. And the last one is something which will make us rethink all our assumptions. Perhaps it's time we start paying closer attention to relationships emerging in and through these new markets. what Paul Rabino has called biosocialities, relationships that are often abruptly terminated in a pursuit of anonymity and privacy. In the name of preserving the privacy of individuals involved in the supply chain, the providers of essential emotional and bodily services are being made nameless, faceless, anonymous, and disposable. For many of the surrogates I interacted with, real change implies not just an increase in payments, but just as critically an affirmation of their dignity, an appreciation of the complex and demanding nature of the service and labor provided by each individual surrogate, the desire that their labor does not go to waste, and that clients continue to respect the ties that they have forged within surrogacy, even after the task is done and the human has been produced. I want to end by connecting my book, Whom Will Labor, to the next book that I'm writing currently. So since 2016, as I said, commercial surrogacy has been banned by almost all countries in the global south, including the doctor's clinic that I made my field home for over a decade. But instead of closing the industry or my field, the ban became the reason to expand the industry, and so my ethnography, into a global one. As cross-border commercial surrogacy is getting pushed around the world and has now become illegal everywhere else except in a few states, especially California and the United States, countries across the world are pushing and shoving and trying to devise ways to be part of this fertility industry and offer some service at the lowest cost possible. And here, South Africa, especially Cape Town, plays a very pivotal role. As the task of reproducing a baby is further divided into neat stages and outsourced to various service providers across the world, the egg providers come from certain hubs or nodes. The biggest one of the biggest one is Cape Town, which is quite intuitive because who can provide the cheapest white eggs? Cape Townian women. The embryos are being made in certain other hubs. So for now, it's India and Thailand where the embryos are being made. So the Cape Townian egg donors are being flown down to clinics in India and Thailand. The sperms are coming with the clients from China, from Denmark, or wherever be. Then the embryo is being made in clinics in Thailand and India, but then they can't be fused into the wombs of Thai or Indian surrogates anymore because the countries have banned that. So what happens then? The embryos need to be shipped to another country where there are no legalities yet, countries like Kenya and Laos. That's where they are waiting gestational surrogates who are receiving these embryos, giving birth to the children who are then being flown back to California, Beijing, or wherever be. So this is the fertility chain that I'm trying to piece together for my next book on global fertility flows. And I'm going to talk about, in this book, the bio-niches which are connecting the world in very unexpected ways. So just like we had production chains, we now have a reproduction chain, just that the actors and the countries involved in it are not as expected as you would imagine. But that's a talk for another day. Let's take question and answers.
Thank you very much. Fascinating and really important issues on so many levels. So thank you very much for coming out today and giving us this talk. I think we got a lot to discuss. I mean, the implications of this, you've drawn out the implications on so many levels. And what we normally do is have 3 to 4 comments or questions, and then we'll go through a number of rounds. Yes. And could people please introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Bessie. I'm doing my inland one. I'm curious as to why the surrogates get a baby shower. Because the baby's for the intended couple who presumably been wanting a child. So there's all those connotations as well as to you're getting your baby. So why that particularly emotionally fraught thing for the surrogates?
Hi, I'm Eli
Sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Eli Torkelson. I've been here about 4 weeks. Yeah, I was wondering about the reproduction of kind of the medical professionals who participate in the project. Kind of what is their kind of sociology? How do they come to be in this kind of world, and how do they do kind of professional reproduction? Is there some kind of specific professional niche that prepares you to do this, or are they kind of standard like obstetricians and gynecologists who just kind of happen to find themselves here because of kind of commercial possibilities? I guess my last question is, how do they kind of intervene themselves as kind of possibly reflective actors kind of in the debates over the legality or morality of the practice? It's a great talk, by the way.
Any more? Or we can address this now and we
Sure.
will have further questions next week.
Okay, so the question about the baby shower, that's a good one. So it's, as you said, it's an emotionally fraught business, but it's all about creating a mother worker in the hostel who would think of herself as the mother of the baby till the fetus is inside her. She should think of the fetus as her own, nourish it, love it like her own. Yet, as soon as she is on the delivery table, going through her C-section, she should become a contractual worker and give up the baby, right? So there's a lot of disciplining that needs to happen. So one of the things that the doctor and the matron keep doing is kind of balancing this mother workerness of the woman. And the baby shower, or god bharai, the Hindu version of the baby shower, becomes very important in playing this game. That it is not, the baby is not for you to keep, yet it should be more precious to you than even your own babies, because of a variety of reasons. One is going to help you change the life of your existing babies. It's not your property, yet it's growing inside you, so your responsibilities are even more. So the preciousness of the baby and the tenuous connection with the substitute mother is established in various ways, and the baby shower or the god bharai becomes pivotal in managing this show of you're a mother, but yet you're not a mother. And it to me was the most ironic thing to witness, and it happened routinely. In the 7th month, the surrogate mother would be given a beautiful sari, a plate full of sweets, token money. Sometimes the intended parents, if they were not too far, would even come for the god bharai, which was such a farce. But anyhow, so part of the play that I do in Made in India, when we shot the documentary, what we said to the surrogates was, why don't you take over as the director of this show and tell Amrita what role she should play? So what the surrogates decided, so I'm telling you the story because the baby shower is pivotal in their head as well, because when they were asked to direct a play, the scenario that they created is a Hindu baby shower for me. So I was pregnant at that time when I went into the field to shoot the documentary. So they said they're going to throw a baby shower for me. And during that interaction where they dressed me up, brought me a sari, and brought me sweets, and got together some savings to give me the blessings of God so that my own pregnancy is successful, there were lots of conversations about alienated labor. How ironic it is that in my baby shower, I get to keep the baby, and in theirs they don't. But the baby shower is pivotal, and the doctor made sure that every single woman got it, irrespective of whether she was a Hindu or a Muslim or Christian. Your question about medical professionals. Okay, so assisted reproduction fertility industry is huge in all parts of the world, and the doctors in India, one of the reasons why India and Thailand are so big is because a lot of these doctors get trained in the United States or Britain. They get their technology from abroad, but then they're set up in India in rupees, which is quite cheap. So what sells is, what attracts people is their American education, their American technology, yet their Indian affect, right? But then your question, I think, was hinting at something more than that. So these doctors are very often not just doctors, but they have huge investments in this industry. So for my second book, one of the key figures I'm following is an Israeli couple And they are not doctors, but now they are trained psychologists, and they have invested a lot in this field, right? And they got a baby through surrogacy. That's how they entered the market. And now they become big investors. So they are not a very atypical example. A lot of people in this industry who have become investors were either clients at one point, or they were doctors and they realized the enormous potential of this. The other figure that I'm tracking is a woman from, I won't name the place, somewhere in Eastern Europe. And she is huge. She's the queen of this fertility industry, and she's set up clinics all over the world. But she started off by being a gynecologist.
Comments, questions? Yeah. Anne.
You keep saying cesarean, and sorry, I'm out from this department, studying here. I was, it's very interesting talk, but as you were going along, you're talking about cesarean the whole time. So is it that these children that are born like this don't have the ability to even to have a natural birth themselves? Because we know that there's disadvantages of the baby itself in its development by not having a natural birth. So are they all cesareans then, and what's the reason for that? And you didn't mention how much exactly these surrogates do earn. How if you could tell us the amount, how significant it is in their lives. And then you mentioned earlier something about elsewhere where there's certain banned services. And maybe you could just expand a bit on that.
Should I take that? Or no, there's a hand up there.
Yeah, another two, shall you? And then Rob.
Thanks very much for a very interesting presentation. You said at the beginning that you spoke about the ward or whatever it was being full up with births and the keyword, and you're suggesting that there's probably quite a strong demand to be surrogate mothers and from women. And I just wondered what kind of criteria are used in selecting surrogates, and do potential surrogates have to go through examination, physical examination, as well as a kind of attitude examination or what's
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. My name is Shahid. I'm also here in Anthropology. So, talk very fascinating. I was thinking about whether you have ever considered engaging with Hannah Arendt on this issue. Because I just recently reading The Human Condition, and I think there's so many interesting parallels with her whole analysis of the way this labor, or this aspect of the private life, which she considers labor, different from the martyrs that she's critical of, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's basically about necessity. So reproduction, in that sense, is about the reproduction of life for her. So necessity, the work that goes, labor is for necessity, work is for others, right? But the thing is that, this is a fascinating case ever, because here you have I don't even think she would have been able to consider what it means for her, the labor of life is the sustenance of life, not the production of life. So here you have the most private labor that the human can do, which is now entering this marketplace. And the parallels speak about the way this kind of nameless, faceless providers,
Mm-hmm.
she speaks about the classics and the Greeks,
should I take these?
Yeah.
Because they're big questions. Right, so I'm going to start, Shahid? I'm going to start with Shahid's before I forget. All right. So, yeah, I cannot not engage with Hannah Arendt's work in this. And to be honest with you, I did not engage that much with it, with her work in my book. But now I have supervised about 16 students from across the world who are working on surrogacy in India, Mexico, Israel, and almost all of them I push to engage with Arendt's work because you are absolutely right. There is a conversation going on here which needs to be paid attention to. And your second question about the blood tie, I'm not the only one to talk about how a lot of medical anthropologists have spoken about how in everyday lives, people across cultures have challenged this connection that anthropologists had initially made between kinship and blood being defined solely by genes. And many ethnographic studies, not around surrogacy of course, but many ethnographic studies, whether in adoption, in foster parenting, in nannies, amongst nannies, they've talked about how substantial ties become more important than genetic ties in everyday discourses and how we need to go ground up and take these discourses seriously. What is interesting, very interesting here is the bit that you said in the beginning. These are mostly uneducated women. They are not tapping into Ayurveda. They are not tapping into indigenous discourses. They are just trying to defend themselves. But in doing so, unintentionally, they are challenging many things which analytically are profound. But there's a but to that as well. But what I was trying to present in the talk is the paradox of that despite unarguably, these are very challenging subversions. But what does it do at the real level? Does it have any tangible effect, or the baby still gets taken away? They are still being treated as disposable. So I think it's a loop of but, and buts. Question about criteria of selection. Yes, I mean, there are hostels. There are not 3,000 hostels. There are 3,000 clinics across India offering surrogacy services. There are about 20, 25 hostels in India, and they all have a dorm-like structure. And when you enter it, it does seem like a baby factory. But the reality is that the demand for surrogacy is way more than the supply. It is an extremely stigmatized, ununderstood service. In India, most people think surrogacy is like sex work. They do not understand the reproductive technology part of it. They think that the woman is going and sleeping with her Canadian or South African client and then having a baby for them. So it's an extremely stigmatized occupation. Bollywood does not help because almost all the movies that have been made around surrogacy, there are 3 or 4, all somehow connect the surrogate with sex work. So the common understanding is that surrogacy is like prostitution, in the words of local people in India, in many parts of India. So a lot of women still need to be convinced to become surrogates. That's why the recruitment system works often through these midwives, these dais, these didis, who go from village to village and kind of hint to people, you can become an egg donor and earn some money. And when they come to the clinic nurses tell them, you'll earn only 300 rands by donating your eggs. But if you become a surrogate, you'll earn 30,000 rands. Why don't you do that? So this is how women are being recruited, right? And from villages across India. So intense recruitment is still required precisely because the demand for surrogates is more than the supply. Is there a criteria? There is no psychological test. I mean, that is a dream if there was a psychologist actually trying to assess whether they're fit. They do have medical tests. They do have all the required tests because that's required. They cannot have a surrogate who has had genetic diseases or has an extreme high history of anemia, for instance, or has had 2 cesarean sections already. So there are definite medical requirements, but otherwise it has to be a blood match, and it's extremely informal. As long as you're kind of healthy, as long as you're below the age of 45 and you're willing to sign into the contract, you can become a surrogate. How much do they get paid? It varies from clinic to clinic, because as I said, there are no laws dictating how much the payment should be. The contract is very informal. It's mostly always written in English, which none of the surrogates can read. But the informal contract, what I have learned in the last 10 years is the maximum somebody has got is $8,000. So how much is that? Around 80,000 rands. Yeah? 120,000 rands. That's the maximum that someone has got, but that's for twins, and that's from a very generous Canadian couple. But as soon as I say generous, I'm trying to point to you that everything is informal. It's almost like you at the whims and fancy of the client. So the client can say, I'll give you 20,000 rands cash, and I'll buy you a motorcycle, and I'll buy your husband a motorcycle. So things like that have also happened. So there is no set rate. Your question about C-sections. Yes, 99% of the cases I actually was part of. I've done my ethnography even in the room where she conducts the C-section, and I've asked this doctor the same question: why C-sections? All across the world, people are talking about natural births and how that's safer for the mother, for sure, and better for the baby in many cases, unless it's required. And she says that 3 reasons she gives. One is that it's convenient for the clients. You can set a date. If you're going to travel from Toronto, it's fantastic if you know the date when your baby is coming, a baby that you paid for. Second is that it's convenient for the clinic. C-sections take 13 minutes. Natural birth can take 2 days. So it's convenient for the doctor. The third one is the most interesting to me. She says she feels that the surrogate is more likely to get connected, to have some connection with the baby if she gives birth vaginally. So she believes that relationships would come through a laboring with the baby, and that's something she wants to sever. So she wants them to have a C-section so that they don't start building a connection with the baby during the labor process. So 3 reasons as to why she almost always makes sure that surrogates have C-sections, and that's all across. Almost all the clinics have C-sections. The baby is precious, is what they say. So at the first chance, they cut the mother. I have written ban out here. Did you ask me something about the ban?
You mentioned other banned services and so you
Yes, so at the moment, as I said, if you're not the quintessential heteronormative family, then the only place where you can go and get a surrogate mother without any kind of legal ambiguity is California. Right? In all other parts of the world, there are some things that are being regulated. So for instance, in South Africa, you can only get a surrogate if she tells the doctor and a lawyer that she's doing it completely altruistically, that she does not care for the money. She can be compensated for time, but that's it. So, and the maximum that she can be compensated is 20,000 rands. Plus per month, monthly payments for the time. But she cannot be paid, and she has to say that she's not doing it for the money. Her bank accounts need to show that she is not doing it out of sheer desperation. That's exactly the model in Britain. That's exactly the model in Canada and many other parts of the world. Then the other kind of model is in Sweden and Germany, where surrogacy of all kinds is completely prohibited. It's just not allowed. And what does that mean? Is that the maximum number of clients go from Germany and Sweden to all parts of the world. And Germany actually criminalizes that. So if the government finds out that you had a surrogate, then you could get into deep trouble. Then there are other regulations, Britain says you cannot put in more than 2 embryos at the same time. So only maximum of 2 embryos can be implanted in the womb of the surrogate. In India, in the clinic I study, sometimes the doctor put in up to 5, because you see the chances that it will fix, that the pregnancy would come, is 1 in 4. So So she feels that if I put in 5, at least one, perhaps one would be successful. But think about what that means. So what that means is very often there are multiple pregnancies. So the woman has triplets, and that's why the fetal reduction surgery is so common. So you try your best and insert as many fetuses as you can, embryos as you can in the woman, and then, hey, she's got pregnant with 3. What do you do? She can't sustain 3. And then you have this fetal reduction surgery to reduce it to either 1 or 2, depending on the health of the surrogate. So there are a whole line of health complications because there are just no regulations around things like these, which are banned in most parts of the world. Did I answer all the questions? I think I did.
Yeah, we've got already 4 waiting to go. Okay, so let's go there.
Okay, so then what really is the purpose of the hospital if it's not to ensure the mother's health so that she could then sustain a pregnancy with multiples? I mean, is it really just for the surveillance? Is that it? There's no, we want to be sure you're as healthy as possible so baby gets the best chance. Because if baby is the priority, and we know that mom's health is really, really important. Okay, but the surrogate's health is really, really important. So they're just, why in the hospital? I can't hear you.
Amon.
Amon?
Amon, yeah.
You talked about husbands of the surrogate mother, sometimes basically twins. I was wondering whether in this book or the one that you're writing, whether you deal with the relations among these men, especially when you're talking about surrogacy and how it is equated to prostitution, or whether when this money is coming, what are the relations after after the contract?
Good question.
Yeah, thank you very much for a really fascinating presentation. I mean, while your book, it was really interesting. I'm Yongjun, doing my PhD at Munich, Germany. I have 2 questions. One question is about the boy preference in East Asia. Actually, the boy preference in East Asia still exists, really problematic. And they go to South Asia, such as India, Thailand, Laos, for getting their boy. But it seems you are seeking for some possibility of subversion against patriarchy. But in this case, this surrogacy is under patriarchy for their boys, the boy preference in East Asia, China, South Korea, in Japan. And my second question is about the global south, because we are making some contrast between the global south and Western Europe or the north. But in this case, we need to talk about East Asia. East Asia has a much developed economy, but still they have a very traditional or kind of very patriarchal ideology. How do you think about some of these comparison or contrast between the global south and the north?
Let's have one more, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I'm Bernard. I'm from Stellenbosch.
We'll come to you in the next round.
We'll take your question after this.
Thanks for this very interesting talk. I'm interested in the category of disposability, right? And I mean, it's very clear how these women are disposable in this kind of labor process, but I wonder about the kind of overall social landscape within which they exist. I mean, clearly what you've shown is that the attraction for many of these women to become surrogates is the commercial aspect, is the financial aspect, and so on. So to what extent within that overall social landscape could one see surrogacy as a kind of antinomy of disposability, precisely then being able to enter the market in a different kind of way, being able to become citizens or to become, maybe not middle class, but to acquire a different kind of status through this action. So the labor process renders them disposable from that standpoint, but the
product of that labour process makes them less disposable, in fact, makes them gives them higher status.
Okay, let's take it.
Yeah.
No, that's
Should
not
we-
very
should we
important.
actually-
Let's
we-
take
we
the
probably-
important question.
Okay, we were going to have another round, but let's.
Yeah.
I was just on Martin, I'm Anderson, and I was just wondering, are the surrogates husbands only allowed to visit at a certain time?
Good question. Okay, so let's take it in reverse order and let's take the most important question about husbands visiting at a certain time. They're just like in a hospital, they are visiting hours. So the husbands have visiting hours when they can come and visit. Those hours cannot be at night, they're always in the morning. Sometimes the husbands are allowed to bring in the children, as long as the children don't make too much noise. So it's all very regulated. The activities during the day are very regulated, and husbands and children and family can visit only during certain hours. Okay, so the question about disposability. It's a very interesting question. And okay, so should I start empirically or theoretically? Yeah, so the women, why do the surrogates get into this? Why do the women want to get into surrogacy? A couple of reasons. When I asked them why they got into surrogacy, of course it's the money. They hope that the money that they make out of surrogacy would allow them to change their lives and the lives of their children. So the desire is that their rather forgettable, disposable life would somehow completely change with this entrance into surrogacy business. In almost all the cases, that doesn't happen. The money is actually too little for anything to change. If a woman went in from being a maid to become a surrogate, she came out and became a maid again. The money is almost always, because of the extensive kin ties in India, almost always the money is taken away by the father-in-law who needed surgery, the cousin whose funeral you needed to finance. So many things happen. You need to make a permanent roof to your hut, all the money goes. You come back to becoming a surrogate, yet you remain a maid. So this dream that their lives would change did not happen. It happened to only 3 women out of the 112 that I have interacted with extensively over the past 10 years. 3 women have been able to live this desire of changing their lives through surrogacy. But they also get in with another dream, that a lot of them are not just maids, a lot of them are textile factory workers. So they are used to putting buttons after buttons in a chain on shirts, a completely dispensable task. And here they are for the first time producing a baby for keeps for someone, and that baby is something that they know is very precious for the person that they're giving to. And that is another thing that when I tried to so-called forge a union of surrogates, that's the thing that they kept talking about, how they got into surrogacy the second time, not the first time. The first time they get in because they want the money. A lot of them came in the second time because they felt like this was something which was worthwhile. They were producing a baby, not a shirt, not a button, not a bangle. So for them, it was not just the money, but the product was something which was far more worthwhile. And hence the kind of indignity of it all, that they are still forgotten. The relationships are not sustained. They don't get to see the baby after 1 year. They all think, we'll get a ticket to California. They'll call me on my son's birthday. This never happens. So I think it's combining what you're saying. I mean, it's resonating with what you're saying. They think that this will make them less disposable, but the irony is that it makes them even more disposable. It reaffirms to them that whatever happens, they are disposable in the bigger scheme of things. Question about East Asia. That's a good point you point out, that you can't always make these kind of contrasts between the global south and global north. There are many connections within the global south and global north. East Asia is an an interesting one. I don't talk about East Asia at all in my book, but for my second book, it's a lot of the clients come from East Asia. The clinics that I'm studying now in Cambodia, Bangladesh, Laos, for instance, a lot of the clients are coming from East Asia. So I'm beginning to engage with East Asian clients for the first time. And it's interesting that you bring that up because a lot of them are traveling precisely because of sun preference. So I don't know if any of you know that in India, for instance, sun preference is so high that now the government has passed a law which says that you cannot even go for an ultrasound to know the sex of your baby. You can't even know the sex of your baby because the assumption is that as soon as you know that it's a girl, you might want to kill it. You might want to go and get an abortion. Hence, there's a law which says that you cannot have abortion, cannot even go for an ultrasound to know the sex of your baby. But what new technology makes possible is that at a very initial stage of the fertility treatment, you choose only the chromosomes that will ensure that you get an embryo which is male, and then you transplant only the male embryos into either the intended mother's womb or the surrogate mother's womb. So you're not, in a sense, you're not breaking any laws because you're making sure that you have a son before even conception happens. But you are making sure that you do have your preferred son. Is surrogacy subverting patriarchy? Not at all. That is the whole point of this. The paradox of this industry is that there are subversions and reaffirmations happening constantly. Subversions of patriarchy happen sometimes at the everyday level when we talk about kinship ties. But as I said, the paradox of it is that at the end of it, it reaffirms patriarchy. It reaffirms the beauty of surrogacy is that it does not subvert the genetic tie at all. I mean, people are ready to travel from all parts of the world to this tiny, tiny clinic in West India, precisely because they do not want to adopt, precisely because they do not want to dirty their blood by bringing in someone else's blood into the family. They want the genetic tie. So at one level, the everyday discourses might dilute kinship ties and blood ties, but at the end of it all, it's the pinnacle celebration of the genetic tie and patriarchy. Husbands. I spent a lot of time with the husbands because a lot of time the women were sleeping. So all I could do was sit with the husbands and talk to them. And one of my other interests is masculinity. So I did pay a lot of attention to what it does to their understanding of their role and to masculinity in general. And it's very interesting because yes, there is the stigma of surrogacy. Almost all of them don't tell their families, extended families, that the wife is doing this. They say the wife has got a good job as a nanny in the city, right? They have to explain as to why she's not there at home. Why is the man having to take care of the children? So the couple of questions I asked was, so what will happen when she goes back home? Will it be strange to you that she's given birth to someone else's baby? And all of them were struggling with that. They were struggling with that notion that there is a fetus not born out of their sperm or semen in the womb of their wife, but in their wife's womb. Yet, the money part of it was so important because the money that the woman was earning was about, for almost all the cases, 5 times as much the man would earn in even 1 year's time. And none of the women were going to keep the money to themselves. There was an informal contract with the husband. I'm going to buy you a little corner shop where you can set up your barbering business. I'll buy you a motorcycle with the money. So there was a lot to gain for the men. What it did, very often what I would do, I would travel, not very often, but sometimes what I did was I traveled with the husband and child back to the village to see what was happening back home when the women were in the hostel. In many cases, the husband had no idea what to do at home. They had never taken care of household chores and they were suddenly pushed into it. So the mother-in-laws came in. Sometimes the clients paid some extra money for the husband to have a maid in the village because he just did not know what to do. But in other cases, and the wives used to tell me very proudly that my husband now knows how to start the chula is the informal stove. He now knows how to start a stove. He now knows how to warm up milk for the child. So there were certain things that they had to learn. There was only one instance where a marriage broke up post surrogacy because the husband just could not deal with the fact that the woman had turned back with savings in the bank account more than he had ever earned. But in almost all the cases, the women overcompensated for the lost masculinity by giving almost the entire money to the men. Hostel, why is the hostel even there? If the hostel, well, if I was playing for you right now, I would answer in character as the doctor, and she would say to you, of course, the hostel is not even a hostel, it's a 5-star hotel, where every women fancy of the surrogates is being taken care of. She wants an ice cream, I'll get her an ice cream. She wants coconut water, she'll get coconut water. And it is true, almost all the surrogates did talk to me about the sheer boredom, the sheer mundanity, the madness of staying within bars, yet this is the first time I can really put up my feet and relax. Otherwise, during my real pregnancies, I was working in the field. I was doing all the household chores. I was forced to have sex with my husband. So many things. So there's no kind of one way of telling this story. The doctor made sure that the women really were very well looked after in terms of diet and nutrition because she had to. A lot of these women had previously been anemic, were very underweight, and she did want them to be good, healthy carriers of the very precious white babies, right? So there was a lot of emphasis on nutrition, there was a lot of emphasis on medicalization. They got vitamins, all kinds of injections, everything possible. But it was all about surveillance, because if it was only about nutrition, give her a package full of all the vitamins and food and let her go. She's an adult, she'll take care of the baby. But it's about surveillance, and hence even for the women who wanted to go home, they were not allowed to. In most cases, the women did not want to go home because they could relax, they could get good food, and most importantly, they could escape the stigma of being pregnant with someone else's child. How will they explain that to the neighbors? Why are you pregnant and why do you come back without the baby?
Fascinating. Well, I'm just going to ask another question in relation to Shahid's question and comment on Hannah Arendt. I'm still trying to get my head around that. And is this process both about bare necessity, getting money, because it's a significant amount. You suggested it's 5 times what a man could earn in a year. So there's that, but also the self-fashioning, the kind of you in a hyper-modern space, it seems like, and you're getting all this stuff, injections, nutrition, the whole range of things going on in that space. There's the boredom, but there's also suddenly you're out of the village and you're plugged into the modern, you could be in the north, perhaps. I mean, I'm just trying to think what that does to this woman, being there for the money, but getting much more, also sort of some knowledge, I assume, some literacy about the technology, and what does that do to them in terms of their own reflections of what they've been through?
Yeah, so a lot of them actually, so I'm thinking about the C-section. As soon as you talk about technology, I'm thinking about the C-section, and even the C-section the women talk about in not just in ways of it's been imposed on me, because as soon as you talk about the C-section, the women would say to you, there are so many women in our village, even if they're dying, they cannot access a C-section, and see, I have a scar, I got a C-section, so scar is being celebrated. So in a lot of ways, that it's a very interesting twist, this new technologies, this hyper medicalization. It is not just about it being imposed. Because of the bare life, in some sense, it becomes their only way of accessing. Yes, true, because they are giving birth to a baby that's white and will go to a richer class or nation, for sure. But this is the first time they can even access, get a taste of what it's like to be in the private sector, to be in a hotel, to interact with a white woman. So many things, and the surrogates constantly reiterate that it's not all bad. Look, it opened up a little tiny window. They hope that this would become a passport to a new world, but even if it doesn't, it opens up a tiny window through which we can see what the other world looks like.
Well, we're at this point, and thank you very much. Yeah.